It is National Signing Day across the college landscape, and Locked On has you covered with the latest for your favorite college teams. I'm Jourdan Black, and it's time to look at the class for Pitt alongside recruiting expert John Garcia. We now welcome in Nick Farrabaugh of Locked On Pitt. Nick, take us through this class. Give us the highlight of the Pitt class for the class of 2023.
Yeah, the highlight of this class is linebacker Jordan Bass out of Virginia. He's a lone Virginia commit of the class. He's the lone signee, but Pitt's really high on this guy. They think he's a legitimate four-star talent. He's athletic. He's long. Played safety, played linebacker, played slot corner, can do a little bit of all those things. Fits Pitt's scheme really well. They needed a coverage linebacker. They needed a star, but he can play Mike. He's got the length to do it. He can play the money backer role too. He can play a lot of different things. He can be that third guy in the Delta package that they run. He's kind of their all do it all guy. He should probably play day one. I think he's good enough to do that. I think he's got upside to be even better and grow. If he develops properly, I think he has the upside to be a guy we're talking about in 4 years as maybe a next level talent.
So he can play day one. John, anyone else stand out to you as someone who from this class can make an instant impact?
I'm going to bring it down to the Sunshine State of Florida. I love a lot of these players that Pitt always does well down here. I mean, I think that's pretty darn obvious at this point. Lamar Seymour, I think, is just ready-made for ACC ball, college ball in general. 6'2", 190 pounds or so, former Miami commitment, just comfortable in the margins, whether it's route running, whether it's polish, whether it's hands, contested catches, being physical. He can do all of those things with that frame. He's done it at the highest of levels, a bunch of state titles to his name as a Miami Central Rocket. So I think he's a guy who's going to have that South Florida edge and get to Pitt and make a huge impact and remind folks why, hey, Pitt's been a prolific passing offense for quite a while. I think he's going to help bring that back to a degree. And then Shadarian Harrison, got to mention him at Lakeland High School, a corner who always had the build, 6'1", 180 or so. But after he committed to Pitt, his rise sort of began. So this early identification and win on the verbal commitment front was really big for Pitt, because after that point, a bunch of programs got involved because he transferred to Lakeland High School, played opposite Cormani McLean, and they went undefeated through the state title ranks because of their defense and their elite corner combination. Folks weren't throwing a Cormani McLean, so they thought they could throw Harrison's way, and all he did was have a banner year and become a national recruit in the process. So Pitt holding on there, I thought was a really nice get. And then quickly from the Tampa area, just to round out the state of Florida, Antonio Kamen. I love him as a hybrid modern edge player, 6'2", 245 or so, comfortable with his hand in the dirt, or as a stand-up player. He's got great bend, natural leverage, and some physicality, just college ready from a physical standpoint, and another big-time program, Tampa Bay Tech, that is used to winning. So production and competitive pedigree coming to Pitt from the state of Florida once again.
Nick, Pitt did a lot of the work early with this class, as so many schools do. Did they have any big wins?
Yeah, I think they had a few. Bass is a guy we talked about already. They held off South Carolina, Virginia Tech. Harrison's a big one for them. They held off Miami, held off Oregon. They held off a lot of good schools for Shadarian Harrison to really keep him. I honestly, in December, I thought Pitt was going to lose Shadarian Harrison. And then they kind of had the at-home visit, pulled it back. They won his commitment. Isaiah Neal up in D.C., he's St. Francis. That's a big school that gets a lot of national attention. A lot of schools tried knocking at his door. Pitt held on to him. He's a high upside type of defensive tackle, twitchy, athletic. Still has to kind of round out the technical part of his game, but he has a lot of high upside. And under Charlie Partridge, you're gonna bet that guy's gonna be able to develop this type of talent. So there's a lot of good wins for Pitt. I'll throw out another one. Kenny Johnson in their own state, pulling him out of the eastern part of the state. Penn State was after Kenny Johnson. That's a good win for Pitt in state. They don't win a lot of guys, obviously, against Penn State in state. So if you can land a guy like Kenny Johnson, that's a good one. Lamar Seymour, too. They flip a guy from Miami. I think there's a lot of good wins just peppered out throughout this class. It doesn't have, the flashy 5 or high 4 stars in it, but these 3 stars all have really good offer sheets, and Pitt won out over a lot of them, even after their verbal commitments.
And how do they stack up in the ACC, John?
Yeah, this is one of the more intriguing classes. Look, obviously, your Florida States, your Clemsons, your Miamis are going to be ranked a little bit higher perceptionally. But once you get to that next grouping, this Pitt class is going to be right there. They did a very good job rebounding. There were some big time targets and even commitments that came and went in this class, and they kind of figured it out to try to salvage it in the meantime. You mentioned Seymour a couple of times. You went after Hakeem Williams, didn't work out. You got another big bodied pass catcher out of the state of Florida. We haven't talked about Kenny Minchie's decommitment, Elite 11 quarterback, huge deal for Pitt. There was a time that maybe they don't go out and grab a quarterback, and they do sign one out of California with high upside down the line. And then, of course, you addressed it in the portal. And I think that's where you start to measure this class. You got to throw those guys in. You're going to get at least, 3 starters, Nick, from this portal group. Phil Jerkovich, of course, from Boston College, pulling him from an ACC program. I think that's a big deal as Keaton Slovis departed for BYU. So you replace him, theoretically upgrade him. And then I think the sleeper's Donovan McMillan from the Florida Gators, a kid originally from Pennsylvania, went down to UF, made some plays over the last few years, changing coaching staff and philosophy, back on the market, and he goes back home. He had a lot of interest in the transfer portal from several ACC schools. So for Pitt to win that one and bring him back home, I think is a big deal, because we talk about Pitt recruiting outside of the footprint. They got to get back in that footprint, as Nick always points out.
Nick, give us an overall grade for this Pitt class. How did they fare?
Yeah, the recruiting class as a whole, maybe it leaves a little bit to be desired, but they rebounded well in the portal. You mentioned quarterback. They land Ty Diffenbach in the recruiting class, but then they go out and get Phil Jerkovich, who's a kind of a vet, a guy that steps in day one, and then they get Christian Veilleux out of Penn State. I think that's a big land for them, right? He's kind of this younger guy, 3 years of eligibility left, high upside type of guy, athletic. He could be the starter next year after Jerkovich leaves. And then you look at kind of other guys. Derek Davis, another high pedigree guy from LSU coming back home to Pitt. He's a guy with a lot of untapped athleticism. We really don't know what he's going to be. He's going to play running back for Pitt with the loss of Israel Abanikanda. He can really step in there, give him a big play element that they don't have on the roster right now. And then Dejon Reynolds, too, from Florida. They a lot of Power 5 quality transfers they added to this room. And then the actual class itself, it's a really solid class. I think it's a good foundational class where, this team's kind of retooling it and kind of rebuilding it after losing most of its ACC championship roster from 2021. Most of those guys are going to the league now. So they got to rebuild and kind of retool. And I think this is a really good class to do it. I think you're going to get a few day one contributors. Jordan Bass mentioned, Lamar Seymour. I think that there could be another one. I think Israel Polk has a potential. They pulled him late out of California too, to be an early down contributor. So there's a lot of guys here. I think that this is a solid B+ for me. They don't have the high stars. They didn't shoot for the stars, and they didn't land those. They didn't land Hakeem Williams. They didn't keep Kenny Minchie, but they recovered very well, and they ended up with a pretty solid class that I think will help them get back to that ACC championship level that they want to.